In the previous video, we talked about the criteria of life, what scientists mean when they say something is or is not alive, and in there I mentioned that the smallest unit of matter that can display all of the characteristics of life is the cell. Cells are alive, and if you're not made out of cells, we generally do not consider that bit of matter to be alive. But biologists don't just study life at the cellular level. We actually study life at many, many different levels of organization. So starting with the biggest, we could take Earth, right? And you guys know that Earth, it's surrounded by this thin shell of gas, and that's called the atmosphere. And if you're an Earth scientist, you would divide all of the matter on Earth into different categories. You have the atmosphere, which is all of the gas. You have the hydrosphere, which is the thin layer of water that surrounds the Earth. You have the lithosphere, which is the thin layer of rock. And then here's the one that biologists are most interested in. You have the biosphere, which is the thin shell of life which surrounds the Earth. So the biosphere is a really, really big categorization of living things on the planet. It includes all life on Earth, from deep down in the deepest hydrothermal vents to way up on air currents where little yeast or bacteria cells might be floating around. The biosphere includes everything that is alive. But if you were to take a look at just a smaller section of the biosphere, at a kind of landscape level, you would be looking at biomes. So we can categorize different sections of the biosphere into, say, a desert biome, a tropical rainforest biome, a deciduous forest biome. These are sort of categories of ecosystems. And if you want to get more specific, we could talk about an individual ecosystem. So a desert is a kind of biome. It's a general category. It's a general life zone on Earth. But the Sahara Desert is a specific ecosystem. An ecosystem is not only all of the living things in that area, but it's also the non-living environment that they interact with. What is the regular temperature in that area? What is the amount of rainfall that they traditionally get? What kind of nutrients are available? What's the substrate of the soil like? Or is it sand in the case of the Sahara Desert? All of these kind of factors interconnecting together is what gets you an ecosystem. Now, if we wanted to not concern ourselves so much with the soil and the water and the temperature and all those non-living factors, and we were just interested in all of the animals in a particular ecosystem, we'd be looking at an ecological community. So if you watch National Geographic and you watch, say, a lion hunting a gazelle across the plains there, you are looking at a community level interaction where you have multiple different species all interacting together. And there's a lot of questions to be asked at a community level. Who eats whom in that ecosystem? What is the flow of energy from sun to the plants to the herbivores to the carnivores to even top tier apex predators? That's all a community level kind of idea. Now, if you were to narrow your focus from the community and just look at all of the members of a particular species in that ecosystem, just one population, that is population level ecology. If you're a population ecologist, you're interested in questions like, how big is this population? How many members does it have? Are they growing or are they decreasing? Are they in risk of becoming an endangered species, or are they maybe an invasive species? Is their number growing so fast that we can't contain it? So that's a population level discussion. A population, again, is all of the members of a single species that interact with each other in the same point in time. But let's narrow our focus even further than that, because some biologists aren't interested in the population as a whole. They are interested in the individual. They want to know what kind of nutrient requirements one member of a species would require. What kind of food do they need? Do they need a certain amount of sunlight? Do they need a certain amount of space? What kinds of temperature and other environmental factors are required for this species to thrive, and why? Why is that important to them? So when you're looking at just one member of a species, you're talking about an organism. Okay, so you have an organism, and that'll be a member of a population. Now, if we go even further, an organism is a very complicated system, but that system is actually made up of smaller systems, what we call organ systems. And you're probably familiar with some of these already. You're familiar with your digestive system, which not only includes your stomach, but it also includes your large intestine, it includes your small intestine, it includes your esophagus, it includes your mouth, it includes all of these different organs working together in order to perform a specific function. You have other organ systems as well. Your skeletal system is what allows you to stand upright and protects your visceral organs and your brain from damage. It helps make blood cells as well. And on that note, you have a cardiovascular system, right? You have a respiratory system, so you're circulating oxygen around your blood through the action of both your lungs and your heart and your capillaries, and how all these things kind of interact with each other. So one step smaller than an organism is organ systems. And then, of course, what's making up those organ systems? Individual organs. So a single bone would be an organ. Say your humerus, your upper arm bone, that would be an organ. Or your heart is an organ. You can usually think of organs as something that you could sort of extract from an organism. Something that if you were dissecting it, you could take this one solid functional unit out and say, yes, this is the liver, this is the kidney, these are your organs, kind of parts of your body that have a very specific dedicated function. But we can go even more specific. We can go another layer of hierarchy down, even smaller than an organ. Your organs will be made out of one or more different types of tissues. Tissues are groups of cells, all of the same type, that are linked together as a kind of fabric inside your body. And their orientation and their shape allows these organs to perform whatever function that organ does. So for example, your skin, your epidermis, is made out of particular types of cells that have a large amount of a protein called keratin in them, which gives them kind of a nice resilient structure, and it helps waterproof them as well, and that makes sure that your exterior body is lined in a way that would protect your interior body cavity from any kind of material that you might interact with in your environment. You have different types of tissue inside your body. You have epithelial tissue, you have muscle tissue, you have nervous tissue like your brain and your nerves, things like that. And then you have connective tissue, which includes things like your bones. It includes the dermis of your skin, the layer that's underneath your epidermis. It includes your fat cells, and it includes your blood, as a matter of fact. So connective tissue is actually very widely spread throughout your entire body system. So that's tissues, different types of fabric of cells that are in your body to make up these various organs. So we can get smaller than tissues, though. If we take just one little bit of that tissue out, then we have a cell. Now, this is the smallest thing that can display all of those properties of life. An individual cell grows and develops. An individual cell can reproduce. An individual cell utilizes energy, and we'll talk about how cells utilize energy and how they reproduce. They are able to do all of those different functions that we talked about in the last video. But cells are made out of parts, just like you are made out of parts. Your body is made out of organ systems and organs. Cells are made out of organelles, literally small organs. Organelle means a small organ. So inside of the cell, there's all these functional parts which are not themselves alive, but when you put them all together, they create a living thing. And these organelles include some stuff that you maybe have heard before. If anyone's taken any biology classes before, you've heard of a mitochondria, and I'm sure for those of you that have, the words powerhouse of the cell just lit up in giant neon letters in your brain. Now that is a handy mnemonic for remembering what mitochondria do, but when we get to it in Unit 2, powerhouse of the cell is not going to be an adequate understanding of what mitochondria do in my class. You actually need to know what kind of job they perform. But you have other organelles as well. You have things called the nucleus, which contains the DNA, and you have the smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum, which help manufacture certain materials. You have the cell membrane itself, just like your skin is an organ. The exterior membrane of a cell is its own organelle. So you have all these different organelles that work together to put together a cell. What are those organelles made out of? Well, they're made out of different categories of molecules, which we'll talk about by the end of this unit. They're made out of lipids, they're made out of carbohydrates, proteins, these sorts of material which are large, complicated biological molecules, what we call biological macromolecules, big chemicals inside of your body. So a lot of you have probably heard of DNA. DNA would be an example of a macromolecule that you would find inside of a cell. And we'll talk about that as its own unit later on. We'll get very, very much in depth on DNA. Now, the reason why we call these macromolecules, macro means large, is to distinguish them from all of the smaller molecules that also occur inside your body. So most of your body weight is actually water, H2O. H2O is a really small molecule. It's just got 3 little atoms inside of it. 2 hydrogens, that's what the H2 means, and then an oxygen linked together. You also have heard of other chemicals, other molecules inside of your body. Carbon dioxide might be one. O2, oxygen that we breathe in, is another one. So smaller molecules are also something that we are interested in biology, because without these smaller molecules, we wouldn't be able to make the big macromolecules that allow our organelles to function. And without our organelles, we don't have cells, no tissues, no organs, etc., etc. So we're going to talk a little bit about chemistry coming up in just a moment here. Now, molecules are made out of even smaller particles, which we call atoms. Atoms are going to be the subject of the next video that I put up. But different types of atoms in different combinations give you different types of molecules. So I could take the exact same atoms, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, and I can link them together and I can make glucose, a kind of sugar you've probably heard of. But I could link those exact same atoms in a different way and I could make fructose instead, like high fructose corn syrup. You've probably heard about that sugar as well. So the atoms are the building blocks of molecules, just as molecules are the building blocks of all the higher levels of organization that we talk about. Now, does it stop there? Not quite. We have a little bit further to go, because atoms are actually made up of even smaller particles, which we call subatomic particles. Literally smaller than atoms particles, subatomic. Every type of atom is made of the same 3 kinds of particles in different quantities. You have protons, neutrons, and electrons, and we'll talk about those in the next video. But the difference between, say, an atom of carbon and an atom of nitrogen is just 1 proton, just 1 different subatomic particle in their structure. So you get different combinations of these 3 things, protons, neutrons, and electrons, and that gives you different types of atoms. Now, does it get even smaller than that? It does. But then we'd be talking about particle physics and quantum field theory and things that are just way outside of the purview of this class. So the smallest thing that I will ever ask you about are protons, neutrons, and electrons. That was actually quite a bit of material, so let's review that real fast. Part of the matter of the Earth is contained in what we call the biosphere, which is all of the living things on Earth. The biosphere contains several biomes, which are major life zones on the planet. Those biomes are categories of ecosystems, so we have a lot of ecosystems around the planet. Ecosystems contain communities, which are all the living organisms in that ecosystem. Communities are made up of populations. A community is several different species interacting together at the same place and time, but a population is just one species, all the members of a single species in that area. Populations are made out of organisms, individual organisms, and those organisms are built from organ systems. Those organ systems are built from organs, organs from tissues, tissues from cells, cells from organelles, organelles from molecules, and molecules from atoms, and then atoms are made out of subatomic particles. And biologists study life at every single one of these different levels. Biochemists are studying life down on the molecular and atomic scales. Landscape ecologists are looking at biomes and the biosphere in general. So biology is, again, a very wide field, which could include a lot of different practices. Now, on this chart of different levels of hierarchy, where do viruses fit? Well, viruses are made out of DNA and protein, and those are both macromolecules. So they would fit in just between the macromolecule and the organelle level. They're smaller than cells. They're not made out of cells themselves. They're not alive, but they would be larger than a macromolecule, say. What about bacteria? Well, bacteria are made of cells. They are single-celled organisms. So bacteria are alive, But bacteria cells are different from, say, a cell that you would get from you or I, or a plant or a mushroom for that matter. Bacteria are very, very small, primitive types of cells. They don't have all of the same organelles that you would find inside one of our cells. They're much, much simpler in construction. And in fact, some of our organelles are roughly the same size as bacteria. And in some cases, that's actually not a coincidence, but I'll get into that later.